What's up YouTube? Welcome to my channel and welcome to the first video of my channel. Today I've got a 2020 SYXMOTO 125 whip. I'm going to go ahead and review this bike for you guys and let you know what I think about it. So let's get right into it. Starting with the handlebars on this bike, they've got two positions they can be in. They've got the forward and the rear. And on the handlebars you've got your crash pad, you've got your clutch lever, push button kill switch, front brake, and quick pull throttle. The levers on this bike are retractable, they're also adjustable, and they have grips on the front. So nice feature set there. Moving on to the fuel tank on this bike has a 1.05 gallon tank that lasts about 6 hours of ride. Seat on this bike is a gripper seat, works great, I have no complaints there. Plastic on this bike, they're good quality, have not fallen apart. Time will tell though how they hold up, so that's the true test when it comes to plastic is time. So I'll let you guys know in later videos how those are doing, and if I notice anything, I'll let you guys know. All right, so moving on to suspension on this bike. This bike has a 17-inch front tire and a 14-inch rear tire. The front forks are inverted, as you can see, and the rear shock is just a standard generic gas oil charged shock. There are no dampening and rebound adjustments on the suspension. Out of the crate, I would say the front suspension is set up fairly well for a 200-pound rider, but the rear shock on the bike is just rubbish. The spring is about a 1,200-pound spring, and it's so stiff that it deafens any dampening effect that shock would have. I myself am about 205 pounds with all my gear. Without, I'm 180. So with the front suspension, no complaints. The rear definitely needs adjustment. Now, on that tangent with the rear suspension about it being rubbish, the shock has already blown on my bike, so I plan to do a video on putting another shock on the rear. I have one in mind that I think will work really well. I haven't seen anybody use the shock that I'm planning on using, but if it works out, it will definitely be a major upgrade to these pit bikes at a much more affordable cost than some of those D&M shocks or Fast Ace ones you can get. So stay tuned for that. All right, so that's it with the suspension. On to the brakes. So the brakes on this bike are generic Nissan brakes. They're knockoffs, but they're the same thing. This has a twin piston caliber vented rotor in the front. Brake works great, have no complaints. It feels just like a OEM name brand brake, so no complaints there. Moving on to the rear brake. The rear brake on this bike is a single piston caliper vented rotor brake. Again, no complaints. It's just a generic Nissan knockoff caliber. So works great, haven't had any trouble with it. The brake lever on this bike, the rear one, is also adjustable just like the front lever is. All you have to do is loosen this bolt and then turn this lock nut, and that will set the height on this brake. So be sure to loosen this nut back here and set the rod height when you're adjusting the lever height. Another nice feature on this brake lever is they put a retention wire on it, and what that does is if you hit rocks or any other sort of object, it prevents this from getting bent out of shape. So another nice feature that this bike has. So that's it for the suspension and brakes. So let's move on to the muffler and then the exhaust. So the muffler on this bike is a non-US forestry approved muffler. You have to put a spark arrestor in it if you plan to ride it out on BLM or OHVs. So it's about a 2.5-inch diameter pipe inside, and it is just a straight through pipe. Now on to the exhaust on this. The exhaust on this is a well thought out design. You'll have a hard time finding a better designed or performance muffler online, surprisingly. So what I mean by that is SYXMOTO, there's 2 sections on this pipe that they designed. They have this pipe that goes into the cylinder head, and that part they matched with the port. And then about 1.5 inches out, they welded it into a larger diameter pipe. What they could have done is just use the same diameter pipe all the way in, and you find that on, you know, almost all pit bikes that you go look at or want to buy. But by doing this pipe gives you an advantage in the top end and in the bottom end. It is a performance modification for 4-stroke engines. So that's another plus on this bike, is that it has a well thought out exhaust. Alright, so that's it for the muffler and exhaust. The engine in this bike, according to the manufacturer, is a YX125. The specs they list for it is a big valve head, a 52.4 millimeter bore, and a 57 millimeter stroke. So if you're into pit bike modifications, the YX motors are highly moddable, and that this particular motor, if you wanted to make it a 140, you could put a 140 cylinder on it, no problem. Just make sure when you do that, you're looking at the 56 millimeter bore, and that the piston is a 13 millimeter wrist pin. So other than that, should bolt on, shouldn't have any trouble with it. Now I know a lot of people might say, wait, this isn't a big valve head, and they'd think that because the valve cover caps are round, but it actually is. They did make big valve heads, and all that means is it's got a 27 millimeter intake and 23 millimeter exhaust. Like I said, they made those heads with round valve cover caps on the 125 YX motors. The 140 YX motors have a 2-bolt style valve cover cap. And those heads also have a bigger chamber designed to accommodate the 140 piston. So on that tangent, if you run the 125 cylinder head with a 140 bore, you will increase compression because it has a smaller dome that's designed for a 52.4 millimeter piston. They both have the same valves, so you're not losing any power there. You're just getting compression by using this head with the 140 cylinder. Alright, so that's it with the cylinder and engine specs. The carburetor on this model is a 26 millimeter Kian PD knockoff, commonly found on a lot of 80s and 70s Hondas. There are no adjustments that can be made to this carburetor, and by that I mean the float bowl. The bolts are flattened, so you can't get a flat or a star or an Allen on there to get them off. The needle clip only has one position, and the idle air screw, or excuse me, the pilot adjuster it has a cover on it. The only thing that can be adjusted on this carb is the idle. Now, with all that being said, when I got the bike, I just flicked the choke, put some fuel in it, and I kicked it over once, fired right up, had no trouble at all. It's purred ever since, so no complaints there. When I go from 0 to 100 on the throttle, by that I mean from 0, when I chop the throttle, it doesn't bog. There's no lag in there at all, and it's just a really good setup carb. So I might have gotten lucky on that, because I hear a lot of people complain that the carb needs to be rejetted. So I may just have a good setup for my climate. All right, so that's it with the engine and carburetor. The stator on this, it comes with a 110 millimeter stator and rotor. I changed that to an 88 millimeter stator rotor setup, and I will leave a link in the description of the one that I pulled out and the one I put in. Now, the difference, going from 110 to 88 millimeters in diameter is not a large difference, but it is enough to notice that the bike is more snappy, a little more responsive, and overall I feel like it has more power throughout the lower to upper RPM range. So I do recommend that mod, and again, I will leave a link in the description of those parts that I put on. So have I had any troubles with this bike? No, not really. I mean, little things here and there. Other than that shock blowing up, I never had high expectations for the suspension on this bike out of the box anyways. I like to go through all the suspension on my bike, so for me that wasn't a big issue that it blew out. But for new buyers, I would, you're definitely going to be looking at possibly getting a new shock within 10 hours of ride time. One issue that I did have to address right off the bat though on this bike was the rear chain guide. It was too close to the chain, and so I had to put some spacers back here on the bracket so that it would move it away from the chain and it would stop rubbing. So there's that. And I have the mud flap off in the shock. I have it down here so you guys can see the shock. That's not how I run the bike, if you guys were wondering. All right, so other than that, ride time, break-in time, I have 2 hours of break-in time that I put on the bike before I took it out and started hammering it. So I rode it for 2 hours, according to what the manufacturer recommended. Changed the oil, put some fresh Valvoline 15W40 in it, and took it out to the trails, and just really gave it a run for its money. Power wise on this bike, it's got, for a 125, the power's excellent. I was honestly surprised with how powerful this 125 was. So if you're looking for a bike, you're 225 and down, this bike it's a good starter bike. It sits real nice. Just be aware of that rear shock will need adjustment or possibly replacement early on. You can get those on Amazon or eBay for less than 50 bucks. All right, so that's my review of this bike. If you guys have any questions, leave a comment. Be sure to like and subscribe. I plan to have more videos on this bike out, such as some riding footage and other possible mods. Like I said, I'm going to be doing a video on a rear shock if the one that I have in mind works out. So stick around, and like I said, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.